Whether you're a student cramming for your Psych 101 final, a curious mind wanting to understand human behavior, or just looking for a clear and simple guide to complex topics, you've come to the right place. In today's video, we're going to do something a little different. We're launching a comprehensive series breaking down the most important terms in psychology. We'll cover everything from the field's historical foundations to the intricate details of personality, social behavior, and mental health. Our goal is to make psychology accessible to everyone. We'll define each term, provide a clear example, and explain it in a way that's easy to understand and remember. By the end of this series, you'll have a solid foundation in the language of psychology. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single part. Ready? Let's dive into our first section, Foundations and History. Section 1, Foundations and History. Before we can understand where psychology is today, we have to look back at its roots. This first section covers the origins of psychology, the early schools of thought, and how it evolved from philosophical questions into a rigorous scientific discipline. 1. Psychology. First up, the big one, psychology. Psychology is the scientific study of mind and behavior. This means psychologists use scientific methods to explore our inner world, our thoughts and feelings, and our outer world, our observable actions. For example, a psychologist might study why some people feel anxious in social situations, looking at both the mental processes and the behavioral responses involved. 2. Mind. Next, we have the mind. The mind refers to our mental processes, including our thoughts, feelings, and consciousness. It's the inner world that makes us who we are. A simple example is thinking about a childhood memory. That entire process, the images, the emotions, the story you tell yourself, is all part of the mind at work. 3. Behavior. In contrast to the mind, we have behavior. Behavior consists of the observable actions of a person or animal. It's anything we can see and measure. For instance, a student raising their hand in class is a clear, observable behavior. Psychologists study behavior to understand the underlying mental processes that drive it. 4. Philosophy. Psychology didn't just appear out of nowhere. It has deep roots in philosophy. Philosophy is the discipline that influenced early psychology by asking fundamental questions about human nature, knowledge, and existence. Think of ancient Greek philosophers like Plato, who questioned how we know what we know. These early inquiries laid the groundwork for the scientific investigations that would later define psychology. 5. Introspection. One of the earliest methods used to study the mind was introspection. Introspection is the process of examining one's own thoughts and feelings. It's a form of self-reflection. For example, if you take a moment to reflect on why you felt sad after watching a movie, you are using introspection. While it's a useful tool for self-awareness, it has been criticized as too subjective for scientific research. 6. Structuralism. This leads us to structuralism, an early school of thought that aimed to break down the mind into its most basic elements. Promoted by Wilhelm Wundt and his student Edward Titchener, structuralists used introspection to analyze the basic components of consciousness. For example, a structuralist might ask someone to describe the experience of tasting chocolate by breaking it down into its individual sensations: sweet, bitter, smooth, and so on. 7. Functionalism. In response to structuralism, functionalism emerged. This school of thought, championed by William James, was less concerned with the structure of the mind and more interested in its purpose. Functionalism is the view that mental processes help individuals adapt to their environment. For example, a functionalist would study how memory helps us survive by allowing us to remember which foods are safe to eat and which are dangerous. 8. Gestalt psychology. Next is Gestalt psychology, an approach that emphasizes the importance of patterns and wholes in perception. The core idea is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. When you look at a face, you don't see two eyes, a nose, and a mouth as separate features. You perceive a complete face. Gestalt psychologists argued that our brains are wired to see patterns and organized wholes, not just individual pieces of information. 9. Psychoanalysis now. For a name you've probably heard. Sigmund Freud and his theory of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis proposes that our behavior is shaped by unconscious motives and early childhood experiences. Freud used techniques like dream analysis in therapy to uncover these hidden influences. The famous iceberg metaphor illustrates this idea perfectly. The conscious mind is just the tip, while the vast, powerful unconscious lies beneath the surface. 10. Humanistic psychology. As a reaction against the determinism of psychoanalysis and behaviorism, humanistic psychology emerged. This perspective focuses on personal growth, free will, and human potential. Humanistic psychologists such as Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers believed that people are inherently good and motivated to achieve their full potential, or self-actualize. A therapist using this approach would encourage self-exploration and help a client recognize their own strengths and capacity for growth. 11. Cognitive revolution. Finally, we have the cognitive revolution. This was a major shift in the mid-20th century that brought psychology's focus back to the mind. The cognitive revolution was the shift towards studying mental processes like memory, attention, and problem-solving scientifically. The development of computers provided a powerful new metaphor for understanding the mind as an information processing system, leading to a surge in research on memory and attention. Section 2. Major perspectives of psychology. Now that we've covered the historical foundations, let's explore the major perspectives that contemporary psychologists use to understand the human mind and behavior. These are the 7 core approaches that act as different lenses for explaining our thoughts, emotions, and actions. 12. Biological perspective. The biological perspective explains behavior through our biological processes. This approach examines how our genetics, brain structures, and neurochemicals influence who we are. For example, from a biological perspective, depression might be linked to low levels of the neurotransmitter serotonin, highlighting the connection between our biology and our mental state. 13. Behavioral perspective. Next is the behavioral perspective, which explains behavior through learning and conditioning. This view, rooted in the work of Watson and Skinner, focuses on how our environment shapes our actions through rewards, punishments, and associations. A classic example is a child receiving rewards for completing their chores, which reinforces the behavior and makes it more likely to happen again. 14. Cognitive perspective. The cognitive perspective focuses on our mental processes, such as thinking, memory, and problem solving. It explores how we encode, process, store, and retrieve information. For instance, a cognitive psychologist might study how students encode new vocabulary words, looking for the most effective strategies to improve memory and learning. 15. Humanistic perspective. As we touched on earlier, the humanistic perspective emphasizes self-growth, choice, and free will. It views individuals as being in control of their own destinies and striving to reach their full potential. An example of this perspective in action is a therapist helping a client build a positive self-concept by focusing on their strengths and personal goals. 16. Psychodynamic perspective. The psychodynamic perspective, which originated with Freud, emphasizes the role of unconscious motives and early childhood conflicts in shaping our behavior. While modern psychodynamic theory has evolved, it still focuses on how hidden thoughts and feelings can influence our actions. A therapist using this approach might explore a person's childhood experiences to understand the root of their current anxieties. 17. Evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology explains behavior through the lens of adaptation and natural selection. This perspective suggests that our behaviors and mental processes have been shaped over millions of years to help our ancestors survive and reproduce. For example, the common fear of snakes could be explained as an evolutionary trait that increased our ancestors' chances of survival. 18. Sociocultural perspective. The sociocultural perspective explains behavior by examining the influence of culture and social environment. It recognizes that our thoughts, feelings, and actions are shaped by the people and communities around us. A simple example is how greetings differ across cultures, from a handshake in one country to a bow in another, showing how social norms guide our behavior. 19. Biopsychosocial model. Many modern psychologists use the biopsychosocial model, which integrates biological, psychological, and sociocultural factors to provide a more complete picture of human behavior. Instead of looking at a problem from a single angle, this model combines multiple angles. For example, when explaining addiction, the biopsychosocial model would consider a person's genetic predispositions, their thought patterns and stress levels, and their social support network. 20. Positive psychology. Positive psychology is a relatively new field that focuses on the study of human strengths, well-being, and flourishing. Instead of just treating mental illness, it aims to help people live happier, more fulfilling lives. A common practice in positive psychology is practicing gratitude to improve mood, which shifts the focus toward what's going right in our lives. 21. Cultural psychology. Finally, we have cultural psychology, which studies how culture shapes our mental processes and behavior. It goes beyond the sociocultural perspective by exploring how deep-seated cultural values and norms influence the very way we think and feel. For example, a cultural psychologist might study differences in parenting styles between individualistic and collectivistic cultures, and how these differences impact a child's development. Section 3. Key theorists and early contributors. With a grasp of the major perspectives, let's turn our attention to the influential psychologists whose ideas shaped the field's very foundation. These are the pioneers who asked groundbreaking questions and developed the theories we still discuss today. 22. Wilhelm Wundt. Often called the father of modern psychology, Wilhelm Wundt established the first psychology laboratory in Leipzig, Germany, in 1879. This event is widely considered the official start of psychology as a distinct scientific discipline. Wundt's work focused on measuring mental processes, such as his famous experiments measuring reaction times to sensory stimuli. 23. Edward Titchener. A student of Wundt, Edward Titchener, brought Wundt's ideas to the United States and developed the school of thought known as structuralism. He used introspection to try to identify the basic structures of the mind. For example, he would ask subjects to describe their raw sensory experiences when viewing different colors, trying to break down perception into its fundamental components. 24. William James. William James, a prominent American philosopher and psychologist, was the founder of functionalism. He was more interested in how the mind allows us to adapt and function in the world. He studied practical topics such as habits and stream of consciousness, shifting psychology's focus toward real-world applications. 25. John B. Watson. John B. Watson was the founder of behaviorism. He argued that psychology should only study observable behavior, not internal mental states. His most famous and controversial study was the Little Albert experiment, where he conditioned a young child to fear a white rat, demonstrating that emotions could be learned through conditioning. 26. B.F. Skinner. Following in Watson's footsteps, B.F. Skinner became one of the most influential behaviorists. He developed the theory of operant conditioning, which explains how behavior is shaped by its consequences, reinforcements, and punishments. His work, such as training rats and pigeons to perform complex behaviors using rewards, has had a massive impact on everything from education to animal training. 27. Ivan Pavlov. While not a psychologist by trade, Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov's work was crucial to behaviorism. He discovered classical conditioning by accident while studying digestion in dogs. He noticed that his dogs began to salivate at the mere sound of a bell that they associated with feeding time, demonstrating how a neutral stimulus can come to elicit a natural response. 28. Sigmund Freud. As we mentioned earlier, Sigmund Freud was the founder of psychoanalysis. His theories on the unconscious mind, defense mechanisms, and the importance of early childhood experiences revolutionized how we think about mental health. His use of dream interpretation and free association in therapy opened up new avenues for exploring the inner world. 29. Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow was a leading figure in humanistic psychology. He is best known for developing his hierarchy of needs, a theory that posits people are motivated to satisfy basic needs before moving on to more advanced ones. At the top of the pyramid is self-actualization, the drive to achieve one's full potential, which he considered the highest human goal. 30. Carl Rogers. Another key humanistic theorist, Carl Rogers, developed client-centered therapy. He believed that for a person to grow, they need an environment of genuineness, acceptance, and empathy. His approach, which empowers the client in the therapeutic process, has had a lasting influence on the practice of psychotherapy. 31. Max Wertheimer. Max Wertheimer was one of the founders of Gestalt psychology. He argued that perception is about seeing the whole, not just the parts. His research on perceived motion, known as the phi phenomenon, demonstrated how our brains create a sense of movement from a sequence of still images, a principle that is the basis for movies and animation. 32. Ulrich Neisser. Finally, Ulrich Neisser is often called the father of cognitive psychology. His 1967 book, Cognitive Psychology, helped define the field and legitimize the scientific study of mental processes. His research on memory and attention helped fuel the cognitive revolution, bringing the mind back to the forefront of psychological inquiry. Section 4. Research Methods. Now that we know the history and the key players, let's talk about how psychologists actually do psychology. This section covers research methods, the tools psychologists use to design studies, collect data, and test hypotheses to understand behavior scientifically. 33. Theory. A theory is a broad explanation for a wide range of observations, based on a large body of evidence. It's not just a guess, it's a well-substantiated framework. For example, attachment theory explains how the bond between a child and caregiver influences development. 34. Hypothesis. A hypothesis is a specific, testable prediction derived from a theory. It's a statement about the relationship between variables. For example, based on attachment theory, a hypothesis might be that children with secure attachments will have better academic performance. 35. Variable. A variable is any factor, trait, or condition that can exist in different amounts or types. It's anything that can be changed or measured in a study. For example, in a study on stress, a variable would be the participants' stress levels. 36. Operational definition. An operational definition is a precise description of how a variable will be measured or manipulated in a study. It ensures that the research can be replicated. For example, an operational definition of stress could be a specific measure of heart rate or a score on a stress questionnaire. 37. Experiment. An experiment is a research method in which the investigator manipulates one or more factors to observe their effects on a behavior or mental process. This is the only method that can establish a cause and effect relationship. For example, an experiment could test whether getting more sleep improves memory. 38. Correlation. Correlation describes a relationship between two variables, but it does not prove causation. It simply indicates that as one variable changes, the other changes as well. For example, there is a positive correlation between height and weight, but one doesn't cause the other. 39. Independent variable. The independent variable is the factor the researcher manipulates in an experiment. It's the cause part of the cause and effect relationship. In our sleep study example, the amount of sleep would be the independent variable. 40. Dependent variable. The dependent variable is the outcome that is measured in an experiment. It's the effect that is expected to change as a result of manipulating the independent variable. In the sleep study, memory performance would be the dependent variable. 41. Random assignment. Random assignment is the process of assigning participants to experimental and control groups by chance. This minimizes pre-existing differences between the groups and helps ensure that the results are due to the independent variable rather than some other factor. For example, a researcher might randomly assign students to a new teaching method. 42. Ethical guidelines. Ethical guidelines are the strict rules of conduct that researchers must follow to protect the well-being and rights of research participants. A key guideline is informed consent, which means participants must be fully informed about the research and agree to participate voluntarily. Now that we've covered how research is done, let's move into the biological foundations of behavior in the next section. Section 5. Biopsychology. Let's dive into the brain. Biopsychology, also known as behavioral neuroscience, is the study of how the brain, nervous system, and other biological processes influence our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. It's where psychology meets biology. 43. Neuron. The fundamental unit of the nervous system is the neuron. This is a specialized nerve cell that transmits information throughout the body by sending and receiving electrical and chemical signals. Every thought you have and every action you take is the result of neurons firing. 44. Synapse. Neurons don't physically touch each other. Instead, they communicate across a tiny gap called a synapse. When a signal reaches the end of one neuron, it triggers the release of chemical messengers that travel across the synapse to the next neuron, continuing the signal. 45. Neurotransmitter. Those chemical messengers are called neurotransmitters. There are many different types, and each has a specific function. They play a crucial role in regulating our mood, sleep, and behavior. For example, the neurotransmitter serotonin plays a major role in regulating our mood. 46. Dopamine. Dopamine is a well-known neurotransmitter linked to reward, motivation, and pleasure. When you achieve a goal or receive praise, your brain releases dopamine, which makes you feel good and motivates you to repeat the behavior. 47. Serotonin. Serotonin is another key neurotransmitter that affects mood, hunger, sleep, and arousal. Imbalances in serotonin levels are often linked to mental health conditions, which is why low serotonin is believed to contribute to depression. 48. Endorphins. Endorphins are the body's natural painkillers. These neurotransmitters are released in response to stress or pain and can produce feelings of euphoria. The well-known runner's high is a classic example of endorphins at work. 49. Central nervous system. The central nervous system, or CNS, is the body's command center. It consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The CNS is responsible for processing sensory information and coordinating all of the body's functions, from simple reflexes to complex thoughts. 50. Peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system, or PNS, is made up of all the nerves that branch out from the brain and spinal cord. It connects the CNS to the rest of the body, allowing us to sense the world around us and carry out motor commands. For example, the sensation of touch is transmitted to the brain via the PNS. 51. Cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is the wrinkled outer layer of the brain. It is the most highly developed part of the human brain and is responsible for our most complex mental functions, such as thinking, language, and problem solving. When you're solving a math problem, you're using your cerebral cortex. 52. Cerebellum. Located at the back of the brain, the cerebellum is crucial for coordination, balance, and motor control. It allows us to perform smooth, coordinated movements, like playing the piano or riding a bike. 53. Amygdala. The amygdala is a small, almond-shaped region deep within the brain that is heavily involved in processing emotions, especially fear. It's responsible for our fight or flight response and plays a key role in our startle response to sudden, unexpected events. 54. Hippocampus. Finally, the hippocampus is a brain region that plays a vital role in forming new memories. It helps convert our short-term experiences into long-term memories. For example, when you're learning a new route to a friend's house, your hippocampus is hard at work. Now that we've covered the biological foundations of behavior, let's move into how we take in and interpret the world through sensation and perception. Section 6. Sensation and perception. How do we experience the world around us? This section explores sensation and perception, how we detect sensory information from our environment, and how our brain interprets those signals to create our subjective experience of reality. 55. Sensation. Sensation is the process by which our sensory receptors and nervous system receive and represent stimulus energies from our environment. It's the raw data that our senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, collect. For example, hearing a sound is a sensation. Your ears are simply detecting sound waves. 56. Perception. Perception, on the other hand, is the process of organizing and interpreting that sensory information, enabling us to recognize meaningful objects and events. It's how our brain makes sense of the raw data. For example, recognizing that the sound you heard is a specific song is a form of perception. 57. Absolute threshold. The absolute threshold is the minimum amount of stimulation needed to detect a particular stimulus 50% of the time. It's the dividing line between what we can and cannot detect. For example, the faintest tone you can possibly hear is your absolute threshold for sound. 58. Difference threshold. The difference threshold, also known as the just noticeable difference, is the smallest detectable difference between two stimuli. It's the minimum change you need to notice that something is different. For example, noticing a slight change in the volume of your music is an example of the difference threshold. 59. Sensory adaptation. Sensory adaptation is our diminished sensitivity to a constant, unchanging stimulus. When you're exposed to a stimulus for a long time, your sensory receptors fire less frequently, and you start to ignore it. This is why you might notice a strong smell when you first walk into a room, but after a few minutes, you don't smell it anymore. 60. Top-down processing. Top-down processing is how our brain uses prior knowledge, expectations, and context to interpret sensory information. We use what we already know to make sense of what we're seeing. This is how you can read sloppy handwriting or understand someone speaking with a heavy accent. 62. Bottom-up processing. In contrast, bottom-up processing is an analysis that begins with the sensory receptors and works up to the brain's integration of sensory information. It's building a perception from the raw input without any prior knowledge. For example, seeing a collection of abstract shapes before your brain recognizes it as a familiar object is bottom-up processing. 62. Gestalt principles. As we mentioned earlier, Gestalt principles are the rules that describe how we tend to organize sensory information into meaningful wholes or patterns. These principles include grouping objects by similarity, proximity, or continuity. They explain why we see a flock of birds as a single group rather than a collection of individual birds. Section 7. Learning and conditioning. How do we learn new behaviors? This section delves into learning and conditioning, exploring how humans and animals acquire new skills, habits, and responses through association, reinforcement, and observation. 63. Classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is a type of learning in which we associate two stimuli and thus anticipate events. It was first discovered by Ivan Pavlov. The most famous example is Pavlov's dogs, which learned to associate the sound of a bell with food and began to salivate at the sound of the bell alone. 64. Unconditioned stimulus. In classical conditioning, an unconditioned stimulus is one that naturally and automatically elicits a response without prior learning. In Pavlov's experiment, the food was the unconditioned stimulus because it naturally caused the dogs to salivate. 65. Unconditioned response. The unconditioned response is the unlearned, naturally occurring response to the unconditioned stimulus. In this case, the dog's salivation in response to the food was the unconditioned response. 66. Conditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus is an originally neutral stimulus that, after association with an unconditioned stimulus, comes to trigger a conditioned response. The bell in Pavlov's experiment was initially a neutral stimulus, but after it was paired with food, it became the conditioned stimulus. 67. Conditioned response. The conditioned response is the learned response to a previously neutral stimulus that is now conditioned. The dog's salivating at the sound of the bell alone was the conditioned response. It's the same basic response as the unconditioned one, but it's now triggered by a learned stimulus. 68. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a type of learning in which behavior is strengthened if followed by a reinforcer or diminished if followed by a punisher. It's about learning from the consequences of our actions. For example, a dog learning new tricks to get treats is an example of operant conditioning. 62. Reinforcement. Reinforcement is any event that strengthens the behavior it follows. It makes it more likely that the behavior will occur again. This can include anything from giving treats and rewards to offering bonuses for good performance. 70. Punishment. Punishment is any event that weakens the behavior it follows. It makes it less likely that the behavior will occur again. An example would be taking away a teenager's phone for breaking curfew. 71. Positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement strengthens a response by presenting a typically pleasant stimulus after the response. The positive means adding something. For example, giving a child praise for cleaning their room is a form of positive reinforcement. 72. Negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement strengthens a response by removing or reducing something unpleasant. The negative means taking something away. For example, fastening your seatbelt to stop the annoying beeping is negative reinforcement. Removing the noise reinforces the seatbelt wearing behavior. 73. Extinction. Extinction is the weakening of a conditioned response when the reinforcement is no longer provided. In classical conditioning, this happens when the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly presented without the unconditioned stimulus. For example, if the bell is rung repeatedly without food, the dog will eventually stop salivating in response to the bell. 74. Observational learning. Observational learning is learning by watching others. We learn many of our behaviors by observing and imitating the actions of parents, peers, and role models. A child copying a parent's gestures or phrases is a clear example of observational learning. Section 8. Memory and Cognition. Let's explore the inner workings of the mind. This section focuses on memory and cognition. This includes the mental processes of thinking, knowing, remembering, and communicating. 75. Memory. Memory is the process of storing and retrieving information over time. It's fundamental to our identity and our ability to learn from experience. A simple example is remembering your own phone number, a piece of information that has been encoded, stored, and can be easily retrieved. 76. Encoding. Encoding is the first step in creating a new memory. It's the process of transforming sensory information into a form that can be stored in memory. When you're studying with flashcards, you are actively encoding new information, trying to create a durable memory trace. 77. Storage. Storage is the process of maintaining information in memory over time. After information is encoded, it needs to be stored. This can range from holding a phone number in your mind for a few seconds to remembering the names of your childhood friends for a lifetime. 78. Retrieval. Retrieval is the process of accessing stored information from memory. This is what we typically think of as remembering. Recalling facts during a test is a classic example of retrieval, where you pull information from long-term storage. 79. Working memory. Working memory is a more active version of short-term memory. It's a system for temporarily storing and managing the information needed to carry out complex cognitive tasks such as learning, reasoning, and comprehension. For example, holding a series of numbers in your mind while you perform a calculation is an example of using your working memory. 80. Long-term memory. Long-term memory is our brain's system for storing information for extended periods. It has a seemingly limitless capacity and includes all of our knowledge, skills, and experiences. Your childhood memories are a perfect example of the power and durability of long-term memory. 81. Cognitive schema. A cognitive schema is a mental framework or concept that helps us organize and interpret information. We have schemas for all sorts of things: people, places, events, and objects. For example, you have a schema for a dog that includes features like 4 legs, fur, and a tail, which helps you quickly identify new examples of dogs. 82. Problem solving. Problem solving is the process of finding solutions to difficult or complex issues. It involves identifying a problem, generating potential solutions, and evaluating those solutions to find the best one. Solving a puzzle is a straightforward example of problem solving. 83. Heuristics. Heuristics are mental shortcuts or rules of thumb that we use to make judgments and solve problems efficiently. They are usually faster than more systematic methods, but are also more prone to errors. For example, when you're not sure of an answer on a multiple choice test, you might use the heuristic of guessing the most familiar sounding option. 84. Biases. Cognitive biases are systematic errors in thinking that can influence our judgments and decisions. These biases often arise from our attempts to simplify information processing. A common example is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out and favor information that confirms our existing beliefs while ignoring evidence that contradicts them. Section 9. Developmental Psychology. How do we grow and change throughout our lives? This section focuses on developmental psychology, the scientific study of how and why human beings change over the course of their life, from infancy through adulthood. 85. Developmental psychology. Developmental psychology is the broad field that studies our physical, cognitive, and social development across the lifespan. A developmental psychologist might examine how our thinking changes as we age, or how our social relationships evolve from childhood to old age. 86. Nature versus nurture. A central theme in developmental psychology is the nature versus nurture debate. This is the long-standing controversy over the relative contributions that genes and experience make to the development of our psychological traits and behaviors. For example, are our abilities and talents primarily inherited, or are they shaped by our environment and upbringing? 87. Attachment. Attachment refers to the deep and enduring emotional bond that connects one person to another across time and space. In developmental psychology, it usually refers to the bond between a child and their primary caregiver. A baby seeking comfort from a parent when they are scared is a clear sign of attachment. 88. Secure attachment. A secure attachment is a healthy, stable, and comforting bond between a child and caregiver. Children with a secure attachment feel safe and confident to explore the world, knowing they have a secure base to return to. For example, a child with a secure attachment might be upset when their mother leaves, but is easily calmed when she returns. 89. Insecure attachment. An insecure attachment is an anxious or avoidant bond that can form when a child's needs are not consistently met. This can lead to difficulties in forming healthy relationships later in life. A child who avoids their caregiver or is overly clingy may be a sign of an insecure attachment. 90. Critical period. A critical period is an optimal period early in an organism's life when exposure to certain stimuli or experiences promotes normal development. If the organism is not exposed to the stimulus during this window, it may be difficult or impossible to develop that function later. Language learning is a classic example. It's much easier for young children to acquire a new language than for adults. 91. Piaget. Jean Piaget was a highly influential theorist of cognitive development. He proposed that children progress through 4 distinct stages of cognitive development, each with its own unique way of thinking about the world. A key concept in his work is object permanence, in which a baby learns that an object still exists even when it's hidden under a blanket. 92. Erikson. Erik Erikson was a psychosocial development theorist who proposed that we go through 8 stages of social development across our lifespan, each marked by a specific psychosocial crisis. For example, during adolescence, the crisis is identity versus role confusion, where teenagers work to form a stable sense of self. 93. Adolescence. Adolescence is the transitional period between childhood and adulthood, typically ranging from the teen years through the early 20s. It's a time of significant physical, cognitive, and social change, often marked by behaviors such as increased risk-taking as the brain continues to develop. 94. Emerging adulthood. Emerging adulthood is a relatively recent stage of life, spanning from the late teens to the mid-20s. It's a period of exploration and instability, when individuals are no longer adolescents but have not yet assumed the full responsibilities of adulthood. Exploring different career paths and relationships is a hallmark of this stage. Section 10. Personality. What makes you, you? This section explores personality, the unique and relatively stable patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that make each person an individual. 95. Personality. Personality refers to someone's unique and consistent patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. It's about how a person consistently reacts in different social situations and what makes them predictable to others. It's the combination of traits that makes you who you are. 96. Trait/trait theory. Trait theory is a major approach to the study of personality. It suggests that personality consists of a set of stable characteristics, or traits, that influence our behavior across a variety of situations. For example, being described as outgoing is a trait because it reflects a consistent pattern of behavior across different environments. 97. Big Five traits. The most widely accepted model of personality is the Big Five, which proposes that personality can be described along 5 broad dimensions: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. You can remember them with the acronym OCEAN. This model is used by psychologists to describe the core of someone's personality. 98. Openness. Openness refers to a person's curiosity, imagination, and willingness to try new experiences. People high in openness are often creative and adventurous, and they enjoy thinking outside the box. They might enjoy artistic projects or philosophical discussions. 99. Conscientiousness. Conscientiousness describes how organized, responsible, and goal-oriented a person is. People high in this trait are typically reliable, disciplined, and prefer to have a plan. Keeping a detailed planner and always sticking to deadlines are hallmarks of conscientiousness. 100. Extroversion. Extroversion is characterized by sociability, energy, and enthusiasm in social situations. Extroverts are often talkative and assertive, and they feel energized after spending time with others. They thrive in social events and enjoy being the center of attention. 101. Agreeableness. Agreeableness refers to a person's tendency to be cooperative, trusting, and helpful. People high in agreeableness are often good-natured, compassionate, and skilled at supporting their friends during conflicts. They value social harmony and getting along with others. 102. Neuroticism. Finally, neuroticism is the tendency to experience negative emotions, such as anxiety, anger, and sadness. It's a measure of emotional instability. People high in neuroticism may feel anxious or stressed easily and are more prone to mood swings. Section 11. Social Psychology. How do others influence us? This section dives into social psychology, the scientific study of how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are shaped by the actual, imagined, or implied presence of other people. 103. Social Psychology. Social psychology explores how we think about, influence, and relate to one another. It examines the power of the situation and how our behavior changes when we are being watched or are part of a group. It's the study of human interaction on a grand scale. 104. Attribution. Attribution is the process of explaining the causes of people's behavior, including our own. We are constantly trying to figure out why people do what they do. For example, if someone ignores you, you might attribute it to rudeness rather than consider that they might be distracted. 105. Fundamental attribution error. The fundamental attribution error is our tendency to overestimate the influence of personality and underestimate the influence of situational factors when explaining other people's behavior. For example, we might assume a driver who cuts us off is careless, rather than considering they might be in a rush for an emergency. 106. Conformity. Conformity is the act of adjusting our behavior or thinking to coincide with a group standard. We often conform to fit in, be accepted, or because we believe the group knows more than we do. Dressing similarly to your friends or adopting their slang are common examples of conformity. 107. Obedience. Obedience is a form of social influence where a person follows direct orders from an authority figure. Stanley Milgram's famous experiments showed that people are surprisingly willing to obey authority, even when it means harming others. A simple example is participating in an activity simply because a teacher instructs you to. 108. Group polarization. Group polarization is the tendency for a group's initial attitudes to become more extreme after a group discussion. A mild opinion can become much stronger after a debate with like-minded people. This can lead to more extreme decisions than any individual would have made on their own. 109. Groupthink. Groupthink is a phenomenon that occurs when a group's desire for harmony or conformity leads to irrational or dysfunctional decision-making. To avoid conflict, a team might agree on a bad idea that no one individually supports, leading to poor results. 110. Social facilitation. Social facilitation is the tendency for people to perform better on simple or well-learned tasks when in the presence of others. The presence of an audience can arouse us, which can improve performance on easy tasks, but hinder it on difficult ones. For example, a runner might run faster when people are cheering them on. 111. Bystander effect. The bystander effect is the tendency for a bystander to be less likely to provide aid when others are present. We often assume that someone else will help, a phenomenon known as diffusion of responsibility. This is why someone in distress might not get help in a crowded area. 112. Prejudice. Prejudice is an unjustifiable and usually negative attitude toward a group and its members. It generally involves stereotyped beliefs, negative feelings, and a predisposition to discriminatory action. Making assumptions about someone based on their group membership before you even meet them is an act of prejudice. Section 12. Psychological disorders and treatment. Finally, let's turn to a crucial area of psychology: psychological disorders and their treatment. This section covers common mental health conditions and the therapeutic approaches used to help people manage their symptoms and improve their well-being. 113. Psychological disorder. A psychological disorder is a syndrome marked by a clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotion regulation, or behavior. These patterns cause distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. For example, struggling to complete daily tasks due to overwhelming symptoms is a sign of a disorder. 114. Anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders are characterized by excessive and persistent fear, worry, or nervousness. These feelings are often disproportionate to the situation and can interfere with daily life. For example, feeling intense panic and a desire to escape in crowded spaces could be a sign of an anxiety disorder like agoraphobia. 115. Depression. Depression is a mood disorder that causes a persistent feeling of sadness and a loss of interest in activities once enjoyed. It can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems and can decrease a person's ability to function at work and at home. A key sign is losing all motivation for hobbies you once loved. 116. Bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is a mood disorder characterized by extreme mood swings that include emotional highs, known as mania or hypomania, and lows, known as depression. Someone with bipolar disorder might feel overly energized, talkative, and euphoric one week, and then fall into a state of deep sadness and exhaustion the next. 117. Schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a serious mental disorder that affects how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. People with schizophrenia may seem like they have lost touch with reality, experiencing distorted thinking, perception, and emotion. Symptoms can include hearing voices that aren't there or holding delusional beliefs. 118. Psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is a general term for treating mental health problems by talking with a psychiatrist, psychologist, or other mental health provider. Through conversation and various psychological techniques, individuals can learn about their condition, moods, feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, and develop coping strategies. 119. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is a common type of talk therapy that helps you recognize inaccurate or negative thinking so you can view challenging situations more clearly and respond more effectively. A core part of CBT is challenging the negative beliefs that fuel anxiety or depression. 120. Medication. In many cases, medication is used alongside psychotherapy to treat mental disorders. These drugs can affect brain chemistry to help reduce symptoms and improve mood and thinking. For example, taking antidepressants can help regulate serotonin levels to alleviate the symptoms of depression. 121. Stigma. Finally, stigma refers to the negative, often unfair beliefs that society or a group holds about something. The stigma surrounding mental illness can cause people to feel ashamed and can prevent them from seeking the help they need due to a fear of judgment from others. Thanks for joining us on this ultimate guide. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone else who might be interested. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like us to dive into next. Until then, keep learning.